All right, what's up, everybody? We are back. Drew Brucker, Roy Flynn, Midjourney Fast Hours, and we're about to get deep into some stuff as usual. But I think it's good to be back. Midjourney's been somewhat quiet over the last couple weeks. You know what that means, though. Typically, when we go quiet for a few weeks, no big updates, something big's coming. I wouldn't be surprised if 6.5 is rolling out in the next 2 weeks or so. That'll throw us into a freaking tailspin, and we'll just have to be all spending all hours of the day getting weird, getting funky, seeing what this thing can do. But, I know you're excited. I'm kind of amped.
Especially as a parent, man. I mean, the only time we can do that late at night and when the kids are sleeping. So I'm right there with you, dude. I think 6.5 should be coming in the next couple weeks. I mean, we were told end of the month when July started. We're getting there. Take that for what it's worth. But, obviously with the changes that are coming to 6.5, clarity, coherence, things like that. I mean, this is going to be a pretty big update, one that we haven't had. When did 6 come out? Last year, at the end of last year. So, I mean,
Close.
It's been
Yeah.
a good 7 months since we've seen that next model come through. And so, yeah, we're getting a little giddy over here, man.
It's every time there's a new model come out, I'm just like, what can it do better? Like I remember thinking like V5.1 or V5. I was like, how much more realistic can it get? And
Yeah.
V5.2 comes out and then V6 and I'm like, come on. Like what like where else does it go? Like how much realer does it get? Because some of the stuff now, I mean, even when I'm looking around on social media too, and there's a lot of stuff on, like Luma, Dream Machine, things like that. All those base images are from Midjourney. So it's like, or majority of them, sorry, for Midjourney. But it's like, I always, a little behind the scenes for everyone too. We get excited about when this stuff drops, but it's also just stress bomb. It's just like, all right, we got to go learn this thing, put the content out, got to get good at it. It becomes like, like Drew said, yeah, you're up at 2 a.m. on the night of the release, like trying to figure out what to do, what to post about, how do I be different from everybody else that's posting the same exact thing. So, it's a good time, but it's also a little bit nuts. So I think we got to brace ourselves for that.
Let me ask you this. What are you really looking forward to with future models? Like, to your point, I think you're spot on when you say how much better can it get? I mean, we already see images that you and I create that are there. Like they are there. It just kind of depends on, have you put in enough time to really like nail it with everything, right? Like, are you going for photorealism? Then, have you indicated camera angle, maybe even a film, things of that nature. But for me, like I think hands and legs, obviously, we've already talked about that. I think those have gotten much better. Also, maybe just some artifacts in the images. Would like to see that next upscaler come through, which is supposed to be a part of V6.5. And then, dude, you know what I'm going to say with the faraway faces. Like, please just give me that. That might be my number one request. Like, please solve that. And what I mean by that is, guys, if you're creating an image, let's just call it like in a 16:9 landscape, and somebody's face is in it, chances are, right, like you might get a smush face or all the details may not be proportionally correct. Like we have got to fix that. I'm tired of the smush face. I'm tired when you have multiple faces in that image that are far enough away where it's just like not usable. So those are the things that are on my list. What are you hoping that they solve here? Whether it's with 6.5 or let's just say 7 for that matter.
That's definitely one of them. I'm kind of tired of like hacking around that. I would like a better upscaler. I mean, if you guys can take me off Magnific, please do. I would like to save some money. That'd be awesome. But yeah, I think there's a few things like, I'm just so picky about what I'm looking for. But when I look at it, the things like object reference is something that I want. Like we have character reference. I want object reference. I also want a second character reference. So I want a C-ref for a second character because, one character is awesome, but having two characters, way better. Also, because it's great with things like it's good with things like dogs and stuff too, which is odd. That character reference is so good. So those things I'm looking for. I would really like a zoom in feature, to be honest. Like sometimes you get something that looks really good and you want to zoom into it, or like crop maybe a little bit. I think crop would be an interesting sort of functionality that doesn't seem too crazy. So there's so many little problems that you run into. Like I wish I had X, but typically they're good at that.
Ooh, I like that
at
crop idea. I like that
Yeah.
crop idea because, like, technically, right, if you upscale an image, you've got good enough quality where you could crop into a photo. The problem is you just don't think to do it. And it becomes too much work to do it because you've already got all these other things that you're trying to do just to get a good image in the first place. Like I'll even admit, just as like somebody with the photography background, I'm too lazy to even think about the cropped most of the time, to be frank. So I think that's a great point. If there were an easy way to do that, that's right in the tool. Now you're talking, right? Because now you don't actually have to create that tech to do that, and instead you can have it just apply right in the tool. Maybe even with upscale specifically, just so you know the quality's there. Like once you upscale, that becomes a button.
Do you use Adobe Photoshop at all? Have you used like generative fill and those type of tools?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So like that's how I'm thinking about it, like in terms of how you can, basically expand on, one a little bit more interactive or intuitive than what we get from pan or vertical or, up or down, whatever that might be. I'm looking at it like that would be really cool if we had that. Also, the way that they have like smart select, and Runway did that with Gen 2, where, okay, it's like smart select where if I don't want to, the one thing that, pains me in there in the reframe or the repaint is when you got to go and like, oh, I want to get rid of this, this arm is like mangled or something. You got to use the little pen tool that sucks, especially if you're trying to do that on your phone. Not great. It's either you get a square or a pen, and that's it. And then, I wish there was just like a little bit of a smart select. Look, I'm complaining about small things, guys. Like, it's not even a big deal. So, but these are things that I like.
Idea, bro. That's a great idea. No, I mean, that would be killer. Like, that would be.
It doesn't seem too hard,
dude. That would be so fire. Give me that. Right. Actually, hey, go in right now and put that in as a request. That's a killer one.
I'm gonna have to look back over this when we're done. See what else I can complain about. But really, I mean, like, I don't have any complaints because I just do stuff, and then I'm like, I think about it after the fact. It'd be easier if, this is me being super particular, but. It's, like I said, I don't know how much better you can get from a quality standpoint. I'm interested. Obviously, what you just said, the faces being pushed, closer into the image and more defined. Eyes would be a nice upgrade too. I don't know if, you notice that with the eyes every once in a while, you get like either the pupils like off-centered or like you get like a little reptilian slit right down the middle.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, you know what I've noticed lately? I don't know if this is just me or not. It can't just be me. Have you ever noticed when you're upscaling an image, sometimes you're getting like this gray distortion in the photo? Have you seen this?
No, I don't think I've noticed that. On specific parts of the photo or just like the whole thing?
It could be any part of the photo. And it's not a big distortion, but it's noticeable. And it's just like it wasn't there when you got the original image, and then when you upscaled it, it got there.
So gray is in like it's desaturating and turning into more like a black and white-ish in a spot than it is like that's interesting.
I'm gonna pull up an example. I mean, you haven't seen this?
No, I haven't.
Oh my god! If this is just me, I'm gonna be pissed. Okay,
let's rip it open. Let's see what we're talking about here.
Here we go. Let me show you exactly what this looks like. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So if you're just listening to us, you're not gonna be able to see this. Sorry about that. But check us out on YouTube, and then you'll have access to what we're talking about here. I don't know if anybody else is noticing this, but I sure have. Okay, you see this right here?
Yeah.
Okay, that is a distortion right in the photo. I'm gonna show you another one. See these lips?
Oh yeah, I see that one way more.
So let me go to the original. See, here's the original. Not there. Isn't that wild?
What is that about? That's so weird. No, I haven't noticed that at all.
So here's another one. See this?
It's like
right there.
It's totally different photo.
You get there and it's just like, oh shit. Well, now I got to fix this. And obviously when you upscale it, you can't just repaint. So then I got to reframe, then upscale again. I've just been seeing this all over the place. So I'm surprised you haven't seen it. If anybody else is seeing that, let us know, because I have no idea whether this is an isolated issue or not, but it is rather annoying.
There's always some random stuff they throw at you, always some random little piece.
I cannot believe this has not happened to you.
I don't know. Maybe it has and I haven't even noticed.
What is
Maybe
going
that's even worse.
on?
What's worse is when you go to post something and you're just like rushing through to get something out, and then you realize after you posted it that it's like, oh, I have like an earring that's floating in space over on the right side that I just didn't catch. It just looks so stupid. All the time. It's always like little details like, oh, I got like a wisp of hair that's not connected to the head that's just like hanging out on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And you're like, well, hopefully no one else notices that. And then someone in the comments is like, the hair's not connected to the head. It's like, yeah, sorry.
Hey, man. I mean, it's not a paid project, so... that's sort of the thing. Like, you and I create a lot of content around some of this stuff, and I've run into that same thing where it's just like, when you spend so much time on it to begin with, and then you're at the final stage, it's just like, okay, I mean, like there are going to be some imperfections, just part of it. I'm not getting paid for this. I'm just trying to show an example of something. Sure, there could be something that's off. Okay, let's move on, right? But
100%. And out of the creative, if you have a creative eye too, and that shit will just bug you. It's like,
oh yeah,
I'm not going to care about it. I'm not going to care about it. I fucking care about it. It's like I'm going to be so pissed if someone notices, and then when they call it out, you're like, God damn it. I hate when you do that. So, dude, it's like inevitably it always happens on stuff that ends up being somewhat popular too, where people you get a bunch of like comments, you get a bunch of interactions, and it's just like, well, I remember my first viral post, I had like 17 typos. I put the wrong prompt with the wrong picture. It was like I just tried to rush it out, and it went viral, and it was like, oh, just getting blasted in the comments. Like, did you even check this? I was like, no, it's Saturday. I was just trying to post something. Didn't think it would go viral. So sorry. It's inevitable. It happens all the time.
It happens, dude. It happens. I mean, so going back to this whole 6.5 update, some of the things that I think we're hoping that just sort of improve besides just the realism, because the realism can only go so far. We've already talked about, I guess, the way that David and their team is thinking about the realism. They know that road ends somewhere in the near future here. So I think it's all about then connecting the other features like you and I have talked about with like 3D, with maybe depth control net, which they brought up. That could be a big potential game changer too, which adds some different levels of variability and versatility to existing images and characters. But I think coherence as a whole is a big thing. It's supposed to improve as well with 6.5 and 7. Now, if you've been using Midjourney for a while, that's changed over the models, like pretty significantly. I think when it moved to 6, I believe, was it 6?
Very big.
I think
jump.
it was 6, right?
Yeah,
because like at one point it was just about kind of putting in some cool tokens, and you could still do that. But right, like there was a definite noticeable change with the prompt strategy that you might take on moving forward with V6. I guess I'm curious too, like let's get into prompt theory a little bit. You and I both have talked about this a lot. I don't really know how everybody goes about thinking with their prompts, but I know you and I have a pretty similar and consistent pattern about the things that we try to think about every time that we're creating. We're both, people that go for sort of realism, but the ways that we get there are a little bit different in terms of the style we like. And that's the beauty of photography and just Midjourney is in general. There's so many different styles, but there are some things that really help define your prompt, but also get you better results. What are some of the key things that you're looking for when you're going about prompting, maybe even just every time or really almost every time, to get that consistency and quality that you're hoping to achieve?
I mean, look, you gotta have a structure, and it sounds so boring to have a structure and to be like, oh, let's be creative, but let's do it with a structure. But honestly, just like breaking down what an image is into like requisite component parts. So you think about what constructs an image, like what are the building blocks of an image, and those are the things you want to control. So the big difference, I think, was 5.2. Like what they did was, it was like they sacrificed some coherence to get like better images. So you didn't have like as much control over the image, but you got or over the prompt, but you got fire output. So it was like, oh, that's why we got to use these big broad tokens to get like these really defined images. Then like 6 came along, and it was the coherence jumped so much that people didn't know what to do, because if they had just come from V5, right? It was like, I remember people being like, I think this one's worse. I'm like, I just don't think we understand the level of control that we have, because it's really like a blank slate now. Like you can control every little piece of it if you want to. Obviously, there's some variability, but like knowing that changed my whole prompt like strategy theory again. Like I went back to what we used to do in V4, which was, all right, I need to put the actual like controls in there almost. Like subject is X, position in the screen is Y, lighting is this. So I actually put that in the prompts where I'll put subject, colon this, environment, colon this. So I'm trying to make it easier on the damn tool, on a stupid brain. But, I'm always trying to I honestly start, sometimes I go way too big. I'll be honest. I go way too big on the prompt to start. And then I'm like, okay, that was actually dumb, because now I don't know what variable screwed the whole thing up. So sometimes I like to start a little bit, a little bit smaller, start a little bit smaller. Really just get like my subject, my action, my environment, whatever I'm trying to really build the story off of, and then add the finer details like the lighting or the different, the color scheme that I'm trying to do, or if I'm trying to do some post-production type stuff with hues and contrasts and things like that. So, it really depends on what the goal is. And I think it comes down to the creative process too, right? This is like a very meta conversation, right? Most of the time I'm trying to show a lot of comparisons in my work. So it's like, this is what happens if you do this versus this. So it's less about like achieving a final product for myself than it is about showing the different variability within the tool. So, when it comes to like client work, you obviously have to nail it. So having a structure there, if you're doing this in professionally, like, having it there and like getting to the end result quicker, like to me, that's where the structure comes in. But a lot of word salad there just to say that it kind of is, it kind of varies in terms of what the project is that I'm working
I like
on.
that. I like that
Yeah.
salad. That was a good
Yeah.
salad.
What about you
I,
now? Because
no,
I know
I
you're
mean,
probably different than me.
I would agree. Like we have the same take on a lot of this stuff, but I think you hit on some really key points. One, what are you creating? Because that really determines I would say the length and complexity of the prompt. So if you're just creating for fun, and not necessarily something super specific or for client work or something like that, then I think like shorter prompts are great. Shorter prompts can open up some doors and get you some images that you would have never gotten otherwise. And so I think it's just like a very cool way to think about it. But, right, like you also need to think about whatever you don't list, whatever you don't explicitly tell Midjourney, you're leaving open to interpretation. And that's why I think like there are a few things I always land on and always insert, especially if I'm just talking about photorealism. Always, I would say like my core ones are camera angle, the photography type, and probably lighting, or if there's some sort of shadow, maybe color, but and this is obviously like outside of your subject and action. I mean, of course, like whatever your scene is, you're going to have that. But I think like in terms of adding some elements that are going to give you different results, higher quality results, and you're trying to explicitly give Midjourney direction and which way to go with this, then like those are the things that I always tend to lean on pretty heavy. And then I do the rest of the work in the parameters, like really test out and experiment using permutation, using stylize, using maybe different aspect ratios. Been using a lot of SREF lately, so use a lot of combinations with the stylize and the SW values, and just playing with those things. So I think there are those core things that I always go back to almost no matter what.
Definitely. I mean, the way I try to tell people about, how Midjourney thinks, you said it perfectly with the interpretation part, because, like we said, if we're breaking this down into requisite components, like the visual building blocks, like they have to be filled in. Like there's not going to be an image without light, right? So regardless if you put it in there or not, it's going to be in there. So it has to kind of build the scene. Just like if I said to you, think about a man in a park, you're building the image in your head the way that you're thinking about it. I'm probably thinking about something different because it's ambiguous, right? So there's no time of day, there's no season. What's he wearing? Where is he, right? But if you say man in a park in New York City in winter, wearing a fuzzy jacket with a spotlight shining down on him, like that narrows the focus down. And now we're
Boom.
both sort of thinking about the same thing, right? It's how the brain works
Yep.
within Midjourney,
Yep.
or at least that's my best interpretation of it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So,
That's why camera angle specifically is, oh man, like it drives me nuts because I think it's almost a necessity to think about with realism, because there are just so many images on Midjourney that look exactly the same.
Totally.
We've beaten this topic to death off air, but like the symmetry, the frontal camera angle, I mean, it's just like if you don't indicate either of those two, that's what you're getting. Like that's what you're probably getting on the majority of your images. And so those look like everybody else, and they don't really tell a compelling story unless you've really nailed a lot of the other elements. I'm not saying that you can't use that, right? But that seems like that's the default. How do you go above and beyond that? How do you create images that are going to stand out? Tell a story cinematically, or just as a part of a project. Well, you need to be thinking about different perspectives, different angles, right? Like the top down, bird's eye view, low angle, and then like what those things actually mean from a cinematic standpoint. Low angle shooting up sort of shows authority, or somebody, that's sort of like a figure in a scene that we should be respecting or paying attention to, versus something that, is maybe high up, bird's eye, which is almost like an establishing shot showcasing, your environment. So like to know those things is so powerful when you're using a tool like Midjourney. I know you've looked into this, but like I think this has only helped me as a photographer, because it allows me to keep using that information I learned while I was doing photography and keep honing those skills, because I'm constantly thinking about those things when I'm developing the images. And I can tell when I'm being lazy, because I'll get a bunch of shots that are just front and center, And, it could be a cool image, but it's like, that's nothing special.
Sometimes we just want to go back to 5.2 when it was easy and you just threw in some words and it was like, bang, image.
Yeah.
The thing
Yeah.
there's like certain things I realize now too, like it has a problem with simple tasks sometimes. There's ways to get around it too. So, like I remember trying to prompt a guy drinking a beer bottle, and it was like, the bottle would end up like in his eye or like, turn the other way. So, and I was like, well, what happens if we get really detailed on this? Like I give it no room for interpretation. Like it's, the bottle is in his right hand, it's held parallel or perpendicular to his face, lips on bottle. Like if you get that granular, you get it. Same thing. Like if I remember doing this for this one character where I was like trying to do a bunch of different poses for him, and that was the best way that I was getting it. Where it was like, okay, he's cradling a baby in his in his right arm, looking down at the baby, smiling. So it doesn't leave it, because if you just said cradling a baby, you'd be holding the baby looking right at the camera, because they love to do that. Even controlling small things like eyes closed, smiling, frowning, whatever. That stuff, it's like a very open canvas. You don't even realize you have the control, but you do. So it's
Ooh,
there's certain,
love that.
right. And I noticed this with you, right? Like some of your images, like when we were doing our room together and just collabing on some stuff. I hadn't even thought to like really go into some of the facial features itself. I remember you were just, you had like scar on the left cheek, things like that. And I was like, oh, that's smart. I didn't even really utilize that canvas, of the face as being like the actual canvas to go and like manipulate. So, there's a lot of things you can do with the eyes too. Like you can say, head forward looking left, things like that. Like you can really do the eyebrows. You can make things happen with the mouth. So it's an open canvas. I just think people default to not utilizing it because they don't know that they have that control. But you do.
If you are listening to this, pause this and rewind that, because this is literally one of the biggest mistakes people are making in Midjourney. They're not focusing on the eyes, to your point, like these minute details that drive emotion or make an image different than any other image that you're going to see. Eyes, what they're doing with their mouth, their facial expression. Again, facial expression totally underutilized. I mean, there are some really cool things that you can do with that. Same with posing. Like, I'm not going to pretend like Midjourney's got posing down, but like there are some that you could put in there, in a brief way, like dynamic pose or dance pose, or like. And I'm not sure that those are the ones, but I'm just saying you could simplify certain ones, and it does pretty good. But other times you're going to have to sort of take your approach that you just mentioned with the bottle thing. You need to almost like say, where is the right arm? Where is the left arm? Where is the leg? Is the knee bent? You do have to get granular if you're trying to achieve things that you haven't seen before in the tool. You just have to. Otherwise, it's just a chance. You're just taking, you're just pulling sort of the slot machine and hoping that you get it back, right? But I think that's a great point. Bottles, cigarettes, bubble gum.
Selfies. That's a good one. Here's a tip. If anyone wants a picture of someone taking a selfie, I don't know if you need it or care, but like same thing, like if you're taking a selfie, you just have to describe what it looks like to you. So if you're describing it to someone else who'd never heard of what a selfie is or how it looks, that's how you want to describe it. So it's a person holding a phone up in the air over their head, or at eye level, and they're looking at the phone, and the phone is pointed towards them. Right. So like you're telling it exactly what to do, because right now it might not know what a selfie is. I mean, might not be trained on a selfie image. Who knows? It can get a selfie image as like a camera angle, but taking a picture of somebody else doing that, really difficult. So
100%. This is the sauce. I mean, really, of the episode is if you're not thinking about the minute details, you're not going to get them. It's just, again, it's a lotto pull. And if you're trying to create something different than other people, and believe me, like there are a lot of people creating things that just either don't look good or look all the same. This is one of the things that you can do. So if you can't get the image right, like what's in your head, like you said, Rory, I think one of the main approaches I take too is if it's something that feels a little bit more complex or I need to provide more detail, I'm trying to create a prompt as if I'm describing to someone that cannot see. I'm pretending like it's an actual machine and I'm saying, this is what this scene looks like, and those are the only ways that you can really accomplish the specifics and then again, drive uniqueness to the photo.
And it's also something you can be super in control of, like outside of your subject, right? Like you can control the background. You could put vase in the back, bottom right hand corner. Like you can say stuff like that. It will work. The other thing I like to think about in terms of how you can build an image, right? Like everyone thinks images is 2D. It's really 3D, right? Like you can go, there's depth within an image. So if you think about it from 3 layers, right? You have your foreground, your midground, and your background, right? So oftentimes, looking at it, a lot of things are in the foreground. Like Midjourney puts things in the foreground. You can tell it to put people in the midground. So, if you want to have like this layered composition look and you want to have, maybe some like leaves or some bushes in the foreground, and then you have your person in the midground, and then you have a jungle in the background. You can tell it to do that. It gives you like a nice layered composition look. I also layered composition, probably one of my favorite tokens in Midjourney, just in general.
Oh, never
provides some
played with
bangers.
a
Yeah,
layered composition.
it's bang. It looks
Yeah,
like Photoshop layers. It's great.
well, to be honest, I mean, even that foreground, midground, background thing never is talked about. That you will, if you even know that, and if you use that in a prompt, congratulations, you're one of the 1%, because no one talks about that, but that is 100% true. If you're creating a scene, something that has multiple things going on, right? It's not just a portrait. That is a killer way, right, to set up things, because otherwise, again, if you're not explicitly saying that, Midjourney can position those things in different parts of the image, or it just maybe there's overlap and there's not like a clear way to define the images. Whereas if you indicate those things, you're getting the depth, you're getting the focus, you're getting the composition right. So all those things matter a ton.
Yeah, 100%. But it's also like, again, then if you are able to, that's why I break this stuff out, right? Like where I'll write foreground colon this, midground colon that. Because in the background too, maybe you don't want, maybe it's not as important to you, so you can be like, jungle blurred in the background, so it doesn't have to focus all its definition on the jungle in the background. It can focus on the foreground and the midground, but you still get that effect. So it's, composition is something I like to really get into. Again, from like even the classical standpoint, some of the classic, composition styles and techniques, things like that, vertical lines, horizontal lines, leading lines, things like that.
Yeah. Yep.
Leading lines was, I feel like there was like a, probably like, I don't know, maybe it was V5 or V5.1, where if you just did anything, you got leading lines. Like it was like everything was like a tunnel effect,
Yeah.
It was so much. But now I kind of miss it because it had that vibe for a while. And it was cool to, it's like everyone's like, well, you didn't even know what was going on, but you had this, everything was drawing. There was, I think it was 5.1, where remember we were talking about, it's like every image has an X in it. You could do whatever you want. If you drew an X through the center of the image, you basically just, everything was symmetrical. You could fold it like an origami and it'd be exactly the same. That used to bug the hell out of me so much. So I'm trying to figure out, asymmetrical composition, off balance composition. How can I get this person to not be in the freaking middle?
Yes, dude. I mean, that's just the struggle. I thought even too, when V6 first dropped, it was doing a really good job of, by default, not doing that. And now I feel like that's kind of changed again. I've just noticed if I don't do any sort of symmetrical indication, chances are 9 out of 10 times we'll get it right in the middle. You know what I mean? And I think like the other thing too, I just figured this out. I was running into this problem for a long time, but I was trying to pan images to fix that problem, and I was panning them after I upscaled them, and I kept getting an error, and I was like, is my pan broken, dude? I could not figure this out for the life of me. And then yesterday it clicked, and it was like, try it without the upscale, and it worked. But like forever,
Little
I was
things.
I was trying to fix images that I had upscaled and fix that symmetry in that way, and just couldn't do it. Like it just kept giving me the error, like it couldn't happen. I was just like, is pan broken? No one told me pan was broken.
I love when pan throws a wild card. You know what I mean? When pan throws like a wild card, where you like pan left, it'll like throw in a close up of a face that that just could be out of nowhere.
Stop it. Just
I love
stop
when that
it
happens.
with that. But no, I think to your point too, like there are just so many of those little things that you need to keep in mind. And I would just say too, like if you don't have any sort of photography, cinematic, designer background, I wouldn't say that you're at a disadvantage, but I would say that those people that do have those backgrounds, it flattens the learning curve with this stuff. And so if you're not familiar with things like composition at a high level, like really knowing the different ways that you can set that up, getting into these things like leading lines, motion blur, like all these different camera tricks that you can do with your images, it's worth it's worth exploring and learning about what those things are. I'm not saying that you have to spend hours upon hours doing this. I think just a really basic understanding of what these things do, some examples of those. You could just do that in ChatGPT right now, and it'll spit out, probably the basics of what you need to know. But it's 100% worth learning in order to refine your images and get better at what you're doing.
100%. Look, Midjourney made me learn photography more. And that's because I liked it and I was a fan of it, and I've done it in a very amateur capacity. But I was using drones. I was using GoPros. I wasn't utilizing a professional camera. I never had the cash flow to get a real camera to actually like invest in myself becoming a photographer. So it was something that, with this being available now, and I can test stuff and then I can learn, and then it's like, well, what does a focal length actually do? What is it? What is an ISO value? What is that even? What is shutter speed? What does this even mean? Like, why is that important? So when you're trying to get cooler effects and you go down the rabbit hole, it's like, oh, this is cool. Now I know this. Like what's the difference between a 35 millimeter and a 70 millimeter lens? Like, what does that do? What's the like? Who cares? But now, because I'm trying to get different effects, I'm like, now I would almost be able to, I think, kind of look at a camera and be more educated about it because I've had to do it in Midjourney so much. Do you think that's like do you think you take like photography as your base like skill set and then apply it? Is that kind of how, when you start like prompting, is that what comes out?
I think so. Maybe let's go through some of these things really quick that we think would be extremely helpful to know. So I think just knowing the different camera angles Midjourney can handle. Okay, getting into composition, those things. We've talked about the big three of photography: ISO, shutter speed, aperture. I don't think ISO is that important, strictly because with what ISO does in the photography world is it's just trying to balance the light appropriately. Meaning if you're outside, it's the middle of the day, noon, there's not a cloud in the sky and the sun's bright, shining bright, that's going to require you to dial down your ISO to a low level in order for your pictures to not get blown out, meaning like all the white or where the light is the brightest, that it's not something that you can control in post-processing anymore because it's just gone beyond its capacity. ISO, not so much. Like, I've seen people put that in prompts, but just I don't think that matters because Midjourney is going to get that right no matter what. The two other ones, yes. Like, I think shutter speed would be worth knowing. And so, like, how do you create sort of like this freeze frame sort of perspective? Meaning, like, if you're in the sports world and somebody's kicking a soccer ball and you want to catch the moment that the foot's touching the ball, you would use a very high shutter speed for that to capture that exact moment, versus a slow shutter speed would show all the motion of the foot and maybe even some motion of the ball. So like, maybe that's a good example to think about it. And slow shutter speed, I think, is really probably the key part of that, because there are so many tricks that come with that. Motion blur, long exposure with things like traffic, where you've probably seen those photos where people are in traffic and they just become light trails because the shutter speed was open for so long. Like, just stuff like that. So shutter speed, aperture, focal length, you just mentioned that. So like some lenses, right? Well, what's the difference between a 24 millimeter versus a 100 millimeter lens? Well, 24 is going to make things very wide open. It's going to stretch things out. 70 is much tighter, or 100 is much tighter, and it's probably better for portraits specifically. It's going to automatically blur some of that background and create that separation. So things like that, just like those photography basics, I think would definitely be worth knowing. I'm sure I'm missing a few. You help me out here. What comes to mind for you?
Well, that's pretty good. The lenses was the biggest one for me to learn. When I first was doing it, I realized that when I was using 35 millimeter as a general token back in, like, I don't know, V4, that things were just looking way better. And I was like, okay, why does that work so well? And, it's a pretty generic lens, but it's probably listed in a lot of the training data, right? That wherever they got it from.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And then I was like, well, what's the difference between Super 8, right? I'm like, I know that from the movies. What does that do?
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm going down the rabbit hole on YouTube trying to figure out what the difference is. And I was like, oh, that's why these guys use, in the National Geographic world, they use those like Canon freaking, not the actual, that makes a lot of sense now though, now that I think about it. They
Right.
look like freaking Canons, those lenses that are like 3 feet long, and to get a shot of a bird in a tree somewhere. But I was like, what does that actually do? Why is that different than something that, I obviously can zoom or have like a really good clear shot, but I didn't realize it narrowed the view like so tight, but it was really long.
That
And then the
probably
eight's the
confuses
opposite
a
way.
lot of people. That
Yeah.
probably confuses a lot of people too, because they're probably thinking, "Hey, this dude got this shot of a jaguar up close." No, this dude
Yeah.
was like 2 fields away and had a big ass expensive lens. That's what happened.
Because that was, as you're a kid, you're like, how the hell did this, why are you 5 feet away from a tiger ripping apart a gazelle or like a lion ripping apart a gazelle? What are you doing? Like, what kind of maniac are you? And then you realize, oh, okay, it's really, these guys are like 6 miles out and they just got, either these crazy ass lenses. But that was, that was a big one for me. That was the first time when I was like, okay, I can get photorealistic stuff. But then you just started adding. I would start adding stuff. I didn't even know if it made sense. It's a 1.8 aperture. What does that do? Okay, or 2.4, or y or depth of field. Like depth of field was a good one. Yeah, I think that was, and this comes back to just like visual acuity, right? Like knowing how your stuff's going to end up with like a purpose in mind. If you blur the background with something like, you can use a token like bokeh or however you pronounce it. The goal of that is not to just like be artsy. It blurs the background so you focus on the subject. So it blurs the background so your eyes go right to the face. That's like the same reason you use leading lines or vertical lines or horizontal lines, because they just inevitably draw right to whatever you're trying to get people to look at. It's like an arrow pointing to the face saying, look here. So I think that's why, some of this stuff is really important, because there's a reason why it's been, utilized in these mediums for a long time. And then, I know some cinematography. I know a lot of the shots. I know like what, kind of what that's about. I know how, color grading and stuff.
You're,
But yeah.
you're playing with runway and some of the Gen IA video too, which I think adds another layer too. Like, not that you can create video in Midjourney right now, but I do think there's probably some unlocks that you've learned using that you could then apply to Midjourney too, whether it's a different type of shot. For example, establishing shots more of a cinematic thing, in terms of like that's language that you would hear with production of a movie. But at the same time, like you could use that token inside of Midjourney to pretty much indicate, hey, you're looking for something that's going to tell a story from an entire scene, right? So have you noticed anything specific that you've carried over just by using tools like Runway, for example?
Well, it works. I mean, the good thing is there's like cross pollination, right? Like if you've gone down the rabbit hole with a lot of the Midjourney tokens trying to get different images that you want, you're going to be just fine. In Runway, you just have to understand with Runway, you're working in 3-dimensional space. So, like when you say like arcing shot or tilting shot or things like that, the camera's going to move. So you got to kind of understand that you can't put a tilting upward shot and have a guy as a high angle, right? Because if I'm saying that correctly and not screwing this up, because if you want a high angle shot with a tilt, if it's going to tilt up, and you want to still have the character in focus, it's not going to work. You're working within the space that's provided in the image, right? So it's definitely interesting, the crazy stuff you can do. But I think, the Midjourney background, I mean, look, I utilize the same stuff. It's the same prompt formulas, basically, that I'm utilizing in my own head. So I think it's all useful, because if you haven't tested out cinematic stuff in Midjourney, I would highly recommend that. Different cinematic cameras, I think that's another one. That's a debate we could probably also have. I mean, I think it used to make a bigger difference. I'll shut up after I get this point out.
I do too. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, no, I'm with you.
There's cameras, right? Everyone was like, cameras don't do anything. I was like, they kind of do stuff, because if you look at the difference between an iPhone camera, if you prompted that, and a Polaroid, it's gonna be a totally different visual signature. So some of these cameras have a very unique signature and they produce a very unique look. And a lot of the times that comes through. If you use a GoPro, it's going to give you a fish angle, sort of super wide lens. I mean, so that's cameras do work, and it's to me, that's a part that if you're looking for something that you want consistently and have an idea in mind of how you want it to look, if you find a camera that works for you, just keep pumping it.
Yeah.
I like to use my Leica M10. It just always seems to be the one that I like in terms of the style that it outputs. But that might be wrong. Maybe it has no effect. But I think
It's like a little. It's like a little security blankie.
Yeah.
It makes you feel comfy when you use it.
first one to think of. It's
No,
also
but, like,
easy. I don't spell
that is true
Hasselblad.
though. Yeah, you make a really good point. It does have information on cameras. If I were to speculate what happens with that, I think some of those unique things like iPhones, GoPros, it's just easier to establish how different those look. And there's probably an easier way to feed the machine and the learning data with those images versus like these film images where it can kind of get there, but it's not super consistent. And then it kind of blurs the line of, oh, this one kind of looks like this one a little bit. Like, because I really think about the training data. How would it know all those different films unless it's in some sort of metadata or it's listed in some sort of meta description or something in the back end? And how much of that is actually outlined when you get into film cameras? I just don't know if it's too much. And so, maybe that lack or shallowness of the information that's available makes that inconsistent versus something like a GoPro, where I would imagine it's very easy to collect the context of this is a GoPro image. So I don't know. That's just speculation, but I'm guessing that's what it is, because you just got to think about, hey, how many images has Midjourney been fed from like a Kodak Gold 100? Like, I don't know. Like, it's probably not as much as iPhone 15, like it's just not.
What's weird is that some of them really work though. So there definitely is data. Like if you use like a Lomo or lomography red scale, like
for sure
it works. It comes out just how it is. There's like a few that really, there must just be like, they must have made it a point because it's too much of a coincidence. Because I've tested like, I don't know, hundreds of them. Some of them do absolutely nothing, but the black and white ones, they certainly turn out black and white, which I think is the biggest indicator, right? Like if I was prompting for a black and white or just without saying black and white,
without saying
black
it.
and white,
yep.
yeah. And it comes out, I'm like, okay, so then there had to be some data on it. But
for sure, that's a great point.
There's some really, there's also like, if you go and look on the photography side of things, right, to like get some interesting pop, there's like effects and like stupid things that you can do, like things that maybe aren't perfect, right? Like overexposed, underexposed, things like that. Light leaks, dust. If you look up these sort of things where, there's beauty and imperfection, they come out really cool. There's a lot of, I'm sure you have a lot of them, or you've probably taken some pictures before that you weren't intending that actually came out legit. Like there's sometimes you get thrown a bone with that stuff.
Yeah, lens flares, like those. Yeah, like some of those artistic elements. Like that's another thing worth running through maybe ChatGPT or an LLM and just seeing what kind of things exist, right? Because there are so many fun ways to create photorealism elements too, just with the camera tricks. Like multi-exposure is one that I've used a lot that I love. It's just so cool. Obviously a lot of people are familiar with things like double exposure. You mentioned, light leaks, all that stuff is really neat. Again, creates a unique image. I think, really the key about this episode specifically is that we're telling you all the different things that are going to separate just a meh average image from a great one, right? Like you need to put some thought and attention to detail into it, especially if you got something specific in mind. Otherwise, again, you're just leaving it up to chance.
Yeah, I think it's good to know, right, if we're going down this rabbit hole, right? Like there's some of the things you've obviously taken from the photo side. I've taken more from the graphic side into like a lot of my stuff comes from Photoshop knowledge, right? So I do a lot of things that from the editing back, if anyone's ever opened up Photoshop and been in the camera raw settings, like you can toggle all of those essentially within Midjourney. So you want to up the saturation, you want to change the hue color, you want to go and, dial up the clarity or desaturate something. You have that capability. If you type desaturated image into Midjourney, you're going to have a desaturated image. If you type high saturation, you're going to get that. If you want to type HDR toning into it, you're going to get like that super, like how GoPro used to look whenever everyone used to edit their pictures on Instagram. It was like this super everyone was like, neon orange tan and like, and had like this crazy, the sky was like so blue, it was almost like electric. Like that's HDR toning. So there's all these little things that you can do within Photoshop that translate also into another good one. I ran this one. I did a piece of content so long ago. Was I just used the Instagram filter names as tokens, and like it came out like exactly the same. So
oh yeah,
yeah. Which
it does Instagram pretty good. Like seems like if you're looking for those like actual real, this looks like it was shot on a phone type thing. Selfie's good for that. Instagram's good for that. Snapchat, like including those in the prompt, typically give you like those super real results. Yeah.
Amateur photography is a good token too because it like intentionally messes some things up, which I like. So it's interesting. It'll get like, well, that's where weird comes into. But also, amateur photography. That's another good thing to talk about. Do you use basically like a photo style in your prompts majority of the time, like portrait photography, editorial photography, studio photography? Do you use that in basically all of them?
Almost every time. Yeah, almost every time. Like if I'm not prompting realism, probably not that important. But yeah, if I'm doing realism, absolutely 100%. Like I would say close to 100% of the time. Just some indication, So if it's more of a cinematic look, cinematic still, movie still, something like that. If it's something like portrait photography, I might think about, I guess, the umbrella underneath portrait photography too.
Mhm.
Like, is this fashion? Is this editorial? Is this magazine? Like, just some of those other subcategories, I would say. But I always try to indicate that. And I've seen really good success with Midjourney sort of taking those cues extremely well to produce the realism, the quality that you're looking for, right? Because a lot of people have trouble with the quality still, which still is kind of baffling to me. But I think like
Yeah.
some of these things that we're talking about, if you include a camera angle, you're saying photography somewhere in there, you're maybe even indicating what type of photography, you're probably going to get pretty good results. Like it's not that complicated. It's not as complicated as it used to be. I'll tell you that.
No, it used to be way harder. But there was, I do like it. And sometimes you need a different look, right? Like documentary photography works really well
Yeah.
for me because I like
Perfect.
that.
Yep. That's a good
A
one.
little bit less of if like that was when I found that if you don't want someone to be looking directly at the camera, most of the time documentary photography is, or journalism photography, street, or photojournalism,
Terrific
things
point.
like that.
Terrific
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
So that was a way to get around like people just looking directly at the camera, make it more candid because candid works sometimes. It doesn't work all the time. But that one was like documentary, photojournalism, like street style, things like that. Those were all unlocks when it came out to being like, okay, I don't have to. This doesn't have to be a portrait of everyone, because you get tired of that. You get tired of everyone looking at the camera. You want to like
Yes.
tell a story. It's not this. Everyone's not looking at the camera. Like no one looks at the camera actually when you're telling a story. For cinema, I mean, unless you break the third wall, whatever the hell it's called,
That's true,
So
dude. That's so true. Yeah.
unless
So
it's
true.
portrait photography, right? Like that's the idea. But there's that to me is like I never used to use that, and now I use it all the time because it's like a blanket category to me that like sets it in that mode. It's like flicking off like a mode on Midjourney, then you can go and like dial back on certain elements or dial up on certain elements.
I got an
It's like a
idea.
set
Let's
style.
at the end of this episode, as we wrap up here, let's talk about one thing specific, like troubleshooting your prompt. You're not getting what you want to get. So maybe I put a camera angle, but it's not giving me the camera angle. Or you've got lighting, it's not giving you the lighting you want. Or your subject, you want a white guy in his 30s and you're just getting, I don't know, not a white guy in his 30s. Like what do you do in situations like that? How do you think about working around that? Because I think a lot of people probably struggle with that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to go with that, right? Like most of the time when I'm looking at the prompt, that itself, if is that the issue? Sometimes it's just too hard for Midjourney to comprehend, especially if you have too much complex stuff going on. If it should be relatively easy, then there's something off. Like so maybe something doesn't counterbalance, right? If you want a low angle shot, but you want like a certain type of shoe. So like really you can't get that unless you're shooting from underneath, like underneath someone, like they'd have to be above you and you'd have to look up at them, right? So sometimes things like that don't make sense, but we all do it. I mean, I do that stuff all the time, where I'm like, I'm trying to get like blue and green colors and I type black and white in there. And it's like, well, why didn't it get blue and green? Oh, because I typed black and white or I used a black and white film stock, right? So sometimes you're just confusing the program with things, but that's where the knowledge comes in of understanding these certain things. So, again, you could want like these two counterbalancing items that don't make sense with each other. So that's one thing, but also you can save a lot of stuff with image reference and style reference. Especially if you want to go on, the type of pose or the type of visual aesthetic. Those two help a lot, and they can be like a crutch. But a lot of times you can do text, text prompting. It's just either you just didn't give it enough direction. Same thing with like ChatGPT. If you got crappy stuff, a lot of times it just needs to be directed more granular. So I like to look at it. So I like to break that stuff out. Subject, position, foreground, midground, background, lighting. Because you can do lighting can be broken down into how many different categories: time of day, quality, direction. Like you can control all of that. But again, also that's another thing. If you're saying midday sun and you have like lighting coming in from underneath, like that doesn't make sense because you have sun
I think
coming from
that
the top and like light coming from the bottom. It doesn't unless it's reflected off of something.
that
Which
that counterpoint thing I think is a big one because I would say that would probably get pretty easily overlooked. I'm sure I've done that before too. Like that is a really, really good point. I didn't even think about that. For the other ones, I would say, if I've had trouble too, sometimes I'll repeat a keyword. You can do that, right? Like your prompt doesn't necessarily need to be something that's publicly adorned. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, that's a
like
good point.
so like if I'm not getting what, like sometimes I've seen success just repeating it. Right. Like, and so I mess with the hierarchy, right? Is it in front enough? Because I still think to some degree, hierarchy plays a role in the prompt, maybe not as much as it used to, but, they used to show all those, components when you had Discord with shorten, like how much the token weights were. And if you messed with the hierarchy, that could affect that, quite drastically. So if you've got something that's very important, move it to the front. So hierarchy, maybe repeat it. And you brought up image reference and image weight. I think that's worth becoming a master at. And what I mean by that is I feel like I'm at this point, so I know you're at this point too, where I know how much basically I need to image weight something to get exactly what I want without overdoing it. Like
Totally.
I have a generally good idea. And so what I mean by that is with image weight, you're between 0 and 3. You've got all these stops that exist within that with the decimal points. And so we were just talking about, I think this was on the last episode, we were just talking about, hey, sometimes an image weight of 1 now is a little too strong, so you have to dial it back. But if I know I don't want the colors to roll over and I just kind of want to give some information in Midjourney about a pose or a subject, something like that, like I'm probably dialing that down to, I don't know, like a 0.4 to a 0.6, because it'll carry enough of that weight over without taking too much of the image. And so like image weighting is a great thing to become a master at because it adds so much troubleshooting capability to your workflow.
150%. I still feel like image weight gets, or just image referencing in general gets slept on so much. I do it all the
Slept,
time.
dude. 100%.
All the time, because that's the other thing, right? When I think about things, I think about them in layers, right? It's just how my brain is wired from working in Photoshop. But like I remember trying to come up with how to get like this really intricately painted face. Like I wanted to put like a really robust pattern on someone's face. I wanted to be painted on there, but I didn't want it to be. I wanted it to look like super clean. Right now, if I want to do that in Midjourney, to prompt that is really hard. So you can do it. It used to be, a lot harder, but it always comes out like a certain way. If I was going to do that in Photoshop, I would essentially take, the base image of the person I was trying to put it on there. I would then take another layer, which is the actual pattern, and then I would blend those two together, whether that's through a number of different functions. But that was the idea. So when I do it in Midjourney, same theory. I'll create the pattern separately and the person separately, and then basically layer them together with an image reference. So you can also take that even further, and let's just say I wanted like this houndstooth pattern like face paint on someone, but then I also want it to be like a cellophane type of glow or shine. I can then generate a cellophane texture, put those two things as image references, then blend them together with the face. Is really like interesting composition of pattern, reflective shininess, face, everything. So you can do that all with image weight. Then, it's not as easy with style reference because it doesn't work the same way. So it's, going back to that stuff. Thinking layers.
You could solve so much more than I think a lot of people think in Midjourney. Like there are just a few use cases right now that are tough, but besides that, there are workarounds. There's always been workarounds, right? Like even with the
Always.
consistent character, you and I had talked about like how do you sort of loop around that? Like there was a way to do it. It wasn't great, but you could do it. Right. And like same with the consistent character. Like, guys, if you have not seen this, Rory did this just incredible walkthrough on consistent character where he did 2 people. And like Midjourney is not made to do that right now at all. Right. So to be able to come up with a workaround for that and then sort of showcase that, like that's a possibility. There are ways to do it all. You just have to know how to get there. And so like the only way to really, I guess, put these things into practice is to try all of them. You have to try things to know how to unlock them, right? Like Rory will still tell me about some things that I haven't tried before. And I'm like, okay, like I need to play with that. Like I just don't know. I've never tried that enough to really know how to master that and use it effectively. It's just another key thing that I think comes up quite a bit is like people aren't thinking deep enough about how they could solve the problems within Midjourney, where maybe you and I have been forced to kind of do some of those things in some ways too. But
when you put 2 character references in as if I was going to go about this and do this, talking through it, I would want to generate one character and then generate a second character separately. So you're creating two different characters that you can then reference in one image. Then when I would prompt, right, like I learned this the hard way, that it just doesn't work unless you actually separate, like define man on left with whatever description you put, for that character, woman on right with whatever description you put on there. And then oftentimes you do all that and then they blend the faces together. So, that's, I'm like, oh, damn it. But really, because we have repaint now, right? Like the best way to do that when you repaint, this is like the small, finer details. This is the nerd stuff. When you repaint, right? Basically, it brings up the same prompt. So what affects that image, right? Would be like, let's say we're editing the face of the woman. In that same prompt, you want to get rid of the man's face because you don't want that to influence it. So you take that image reference out of the prompt. And then you also take anything about the man out of the prompt. So it's just about the woman, just so it can focus its attention on what exactly you're trying to get out of that repaint. Enter, and most of the time it works right away. So something like that works with avatars too, if you're trying to do that for yourself. Like when you're trying to create an avatar using an image reference, right? And it's like, bang, this doesn't look like me. Okay, cool. Let me just repaint my face. You don't have to do a little hot tip on this one. Don't put a square around the whole head. Paint the face itself. So just like the face itself and then repaint it that way, it'll come out way better because sometimes you put the square and the head turns out like, it's got like
Yeah.
radiation or something, like it just like expanded like 6 sizes. So that was really, really detailed without showing someone how to do it. And I know that probably makes sense to just about no one, but we ripped through a ton in this one. That was a lot on that last half. So feel like we just brain dumped like 6 months worth of stuff there. But that was good, man. That's going to wrap it up today. But Drew, you got anything else?
I think we left the people enough to chew on for today. I'm feeling pretty good about that.
Pretty solid. But yeah, man, let's circle the wagons. Let's get back and get ready for 6.5. I know it's coming.
Maybe we'll have it. Maybe we'll have it by the next episode. We'll see.
That's going to be like an emergency podcast. We're going to have to do like live, maybe.
Ooh, I like that. Stay tuned for that.